Chapter 37. I had been plunged from a summer of high activity into a lackluster autumn. The only signs of farm life were the 5 big gray geese honking at Brucey and Jingle Bells out on the driveway. I sat twiddling my thumbs, aware I should go out to the office and work on Tim's workers' compensation report. Or on Olav's visa. What a headache. Alternatively, I could drive down to the Holgate house. We had finally reached an agreement with Mr. Buckle, and on August 29, 1958, had sold him the back lot of the Holgate property. But our renter had been complaining ever since, about machinery in the driveway or something. Looking back, I realize I should have given him notice right then. By contrast to my sluggishness, Corey was a ball of fire. What time he had to spare from his business was consumed by his church work. He was on the board of deacons and head of the building committee. They were just completing the gargantuan job of digging out the basement and building Sunday school rooms. His devotion amazed me. I thought of the days when I couldn't get him into a church. Now it seemed nothing would ever keep him out. If anyone had hinted at such a thing, I would never have guessed anything other than his upcoming winter schedule. He was slated to officiate in a number of ski tournaments, including the 1959 North American Championships in Squaw Valley, California. And the following season would be even more hectic, as he had been appointed chief of the jumping hill for the 1960 Winter Olympics. When the ski season arrived, the Gustafsson family, Corey, the kids, and I, Gurley, Torsten, Thurston, and Nina, Svea and Tom, Ragnar, and the Koppen family, rented Einar Hermansson's cabin, which was just behind the Cascade Clubhouse. Every weekend we were there. For the first time since we had started to raise a family, I was relieved of having to tend to a little one. Freya was usually skiing on the slalom hill, Sig was with Corey at the jumping hill, and Eric was tearing down the slopes faster than I could keep up. Sig was going to jumping tournaments with the ski team. I was apprehensive, praying that he wouldn't come home with yet another broken leg. "Then your grandmother will start counting to 3 again," I said. But I knew I had to let him go. Sig arrived home from a tournament late one Sunday evening after we were all in bed. He was so excited that we suspected he had won a trophy. But before we had time to find out, someone stuck his head in and said, "Yeah." It was Olav. He had come back on a visitor's visa. We were overjoyed. It was like having a member of the family home again. The next morning, the kids missed their school bus. We sat and drank coffee and chattered. Olav walked back and forth across the room, and we lavished praise on him, although he had a very pronounced limp. He confessed how much he missed us, very extravagant for a Norwegian. I vant to help the boys shy jumping, and there must be tinges I can do around here. I had the warm feeling in my heart that Jesus must have had when the 10th leper returned to give thanks. "Well, we have a big project ahead. Our house in town will be vacant, the renters are moving, and it needs cleaning and painting." So Olav began going to the mountain on the weekends, and during the week, he went with me to town armed with mops, pails, and paintbrushes. He was an extremely meticulous worker, and the house began to shape up beautifully. "Ja, this is a nice house," Olav said. "Und you are so much room having." I was sitting on the stairs. "Ja, a nice house and so much room having." I reflected on the change in our family. When we had moved to the valley, our children were preteens, anticipating new adventures, and didn't object to limited space. But now, Freya was a young lady stuck in a tiny bedroom, and Sig had outgrown his bunk bed by several toe lengths. At first, they had submitted to our rules without much question, but now they were pushing for independence. It was something that I was not prepared for, and on looking back, I realized that I didn't handle it well. I should have realized that once a person passed his or her driver's test, which Freya had just done, someone else was sitting at the wheel. This push for independence reached deeply into our church attendance when we were going to Einar's cabin, and every Saturday evening, we would leave the festivities and drive back to town so that we could attend Sunday school the next day. It took a force akin to Moses parting the Red Sea to tear the kids away. I worried, would this drive them back to Egypt? But then came the axe to our Sunday school efforts. Corey had been called to a special meeting of the deacons to consider a tricky situation. Some of the more liberal members had nominated Tim as a deacon. The question, however, was being asked by many in the congregation. Was he mature enough in the faith? I knew there would be considerable debate, but I was utterly unprepared for what happened. Corey came home looking more deflated than I had ever seen him. I began to question him. His words I found impossible to believe. I was voted off the board of deacons.